Business at scale, can security catch up? As businesses are operating at hyperscale to drive the strategic agenda to support digital transformation journey of the organizations, this panel shall reflect upon the issue of how security and privacy are going to play at scale. To take the discussions further, may I call upon the moderator of the session, Mr. Vinayak Godse, Vice President, DSCI, to take his seat on the stage. Now I would like to request the esteemed panelists for this session to please come on stage. Mr. Tim Crothers, Vice President, Security Solutions Target. Mr. Jeyandran Venugopal, Senior Vice President, Product and Engineering, Flipkart. Mr. Deepak Talwar, National Security Officer, Microsoft India. I would request the esteemed panel to factor in some time for the question and answer from the delegates. I would also encourage the audience to keep letting us know about the session and experience at BPM through your social media using the hashtag BPM 2019 and mention @DSCI_Connect on Twitter. May I now request the moderator to initiate the session.
Yeah, thank you, Mohita, and welcome you all for the 11th edition of DSS Best Practices Meet. And as you know, this is a theme-based cybersecurity event. Every year we pick up a theme. Last it was a platformization of security. This year we picked up a theme of a scale because each business, because of a digitization push and pull, has been charting journey of changing the business horizon in a more scalable, more voluminous kind of a transaction they have been trying to process. And each business, be it oil energy company, e-commerce company, or banking organization, or for that matter government organization as well, had been doing the process of digitization, had been seeing a lot of those changes and transformation. So what we will try to do in this particular plenary discussion is to look at how the business is going, what are those driving forces basically which are making this reality of taking the business more scalable at a local, regional and global level as well. How technology is driving it, how the business models are around that are evolving. And then towards the end, we'll try to dwell down on security as well. We try to look at how security is catching up with the entire this ecosystem, which is going more scalable, more voluminous, and more complex as well. So to cover this discussion, we have Mr. Jeyandran from Flipkart, and one of the major interesting experiment in online e-commerce in this country, and we are seeing the kind of a journey that Flipkart has been seeing in last 6-7 years of time, and there's a lot of new paradigms that is getting created, a lot of new histories that is getting created in e-commerce industry, and we also have a team to talk about the global view, what happens in the retail industry and how the retail industry is growing in a different geographies, and how exactly the entire technology ecosystem is getting created, what kind of engineering effort that is getting created, and what that lead to security discussion. And we both, Deepak and me here, are security professional, and we'll try to explore from our side what exactly the security that we are looking at, but Deepak will primarily look at from the cloud and how the cloud is playing important role in a security transformation or helping business transform securely basically. So I'd like to start with Jeyandran from you. You can just dwell on this entire scalability, the entire product engineering that work that you have been undertaking. So how exactly and what kind of transformation paradigm shift that you are seeing in a businesses in a larger e-commerce company like Flipkart?
Thank you. Hello. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. So thanks for this opportunity to share what Flipkart has been doing in the realm of protecting our information, users' information that they've entrusted to us. And over the years, as Flipkart as a business has scaled, of course, we had the advantage of being a native digital company, right? So we didn't have to go through a kind of a digitization journey, and it was an engineering first kind of a company. So we always had that advantage of thinking from the ground up when we built systems, most of which were developed in-house, right? So we had the ability to create solutions that went beyond normal paradigms, tools that are available readily in the market. And we have been continuing to invest in that. As the scale of data has grown, just for an example, in terms of just instrumentation and collection of data, we collect more than 1 million data points per second from our deployment networks. Right? This includes everything from application services to network endpoints and everything, right? So it is very difficult to actually process all the data and monitor it in near real time without the use and deployment of technologies that go far beyond any out-of-the-box solutions that you would be able to find, right? So we continue to invest in some of those technologies. Of course, the emergence of AI, ML has been a huge boon for even the security field in terms of how we do anomaly detection, how do we respond to security threats, and that's something that we are very interested in partnering with companies. We do a lot of in-house development as well. I'll talk more about it as we go along in the panel.
Yeah. So Tim, although it is largely brick and mortar retail business as a target we know of, but you are also now charting online e-commerce journey as well. So how this transformation is happening, and what kind of growth that you are seeing, what kind of possibilities that you have been looking at in terms of the scale and value. So how do we are seeing going in a larger retail industry like a Target, which has also significant presence in India?
Yeah, the scale certainly brings all sorts of challenges and opportunities, right? To answer your question, the transformation we're finding is less about just being purely a digital transformation and more about it being a combination of how we think about our core mission and our core priorities, right? So digital is one channel through which our guests are served, but simultaneously what we find is that because of the increasing complexity of life, because of the hecticness that most of us experience, there's a desire for the ability to serve our guests at any point in any way that they want. So how can we make it easier so that they can perhaps order in the app online, on their way home from work, they can swing into the parking lot, one of our team members brings out the products that they want, or perhaps one of our Ship personal shoppers delivers, again, that they've ordered online. And it's that, I think there's this clear transformation, not just in retail, but in talking to lots and lots of peers in lots of industries, where what we do in IT in particular is becoming foundational to all businesses. I think most businesses are starting to think of themselves less as specific vertical companies, although that will certainly always be the case. But in our case, we also think of ourselves as a technology company.
Yeah, so from both of you, I definitely like to, the experience that we are trying to build. So for example, there are a number of transactions that needs to be fulfilled. Another is for each transaction, there's so many things needs to be happening. So for example, in your case, you are talking about the kind of experience you are giving it to the consumer. And then the experience of consumer is becoming very important part. So for each transaction, there are a lot of things that is going in one transaction. There are multiple transactions and millions of transactions are happening. So how do you see the approach is understanding the volume and then again looking at one transaction specifics of that transaction, which also is becoming more scalable because of so many things coming in one transaction.
So yeah, I think in terms of, we as a brand, of course, need to take protection of both our customers as well as sellers very seriously, right? So both are important stakeholders in our marketplace ecosystem. And always as a brand grows, it is very important to protect the brand from malicious players who try to come in and maybe create not the best of experience for the rest of the players in that ecosystem, right? So we deploy fairly advanced transaction screening systems. We call them as trust and safety is what we internally call it. So we have a team that deploys a lot of in-house advanced tooling that we have developed to screen all transactions happening in our systems to understand patterns. So we deploy, for example, there are certain techniques like ARIMA techniques, which are basically autocorrelation models, data science models that we use to do time series prediction. And whenever there is any big variance in terms of what the prediction is from what we see in actuals, we have the ability to immediately route it and start looking at it more closely, right? There is always going to be some human element involved, but with the scale of transactions going up, unless your models become very good and what we call as type 1 and type 2 errors, right? The false positives and the false negatives need to actually go down. So that is why there is a need for constant investment in technology. Of course, the scale of data itself is going to be helping the development of these models, right? So that is a big barrier for example, a startup or a new company entering this space, for them to develop screening models for transaction safety, etc., would be very tough, because the wealth of data we have accumulated over the years and the patterns that we have seen are what actually makes our models actually better, and they get better on a day-by-day basis. So those are some of the things that we do to help protect our ecosystem using technology.
Yeah, I think that's, I completely agree with that. I would add on just a couple things. From my perspective, I think the scale is ultimately very beneficial for all of us, because what it's doing is, as we as organizations figure out how to deal with these scales, it's exposing problems that have existed all along, right? Protecting the integrity, the privacy of our guest data, of our core data, isn't an option, right? It's a must-have. It's a fundamental need of all businesses nowadays. And so with the scaling up that a lot of us are seeing as organizations, it's exposing what's candidly been problems for years and years and years, but now are avoidable. And so it's driving these sorts of technology changes that help us with that. Although, even though I'm an engineer, I think at the heart of it is still about the people. The technology is really, really incredible, but we still need really skilled people to drive those models, right? To train, to aim, all of that technology. At the end of the day, if we put it in the hands of really skilled people, we're going to have amazing results. If we put them in the hands of unskilled people, we're not going to have quite so good of results.
Yeah. So Deepak, as a cloud provider, and some of the interesting and larger stories have been now written on the cloud. So how do you see the scale of the demand that is coming from the different clients which are hosting on a cloud platform, and how, and not only one sector, but there are different sectors now charting these digitization strategies. So how do you see that is evolving and putting too much of a demand, but whether that demand is being satisfied by the cloud ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you, Vinayak. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So I'll take a step back first. When we talk about technology and we being a platform company as Microsoft, technology is an enabler, as we say so, right? And security is part of the trust when we build any organization.
Yeah.
So immaterial of any organizations, with the public sector, government, data protection as a tool and technology, just to add those points. Today, all those protections are in place. The CXOs are talking, what is the ROI of that? Because I don't see any breach there. Whereas the breaches are happening on the incident and management. Now what is happening, we have transformed, let's look back and learn and unlearn from data protection to classify. Once you classify, then only you know what is happening next.
Yeah.
So these are part of the privacy, data, and regulation, but the second part of the story is we need to take or tackle the privacy part or compliance part separately. While you are taking the digital transformation, the data protection, privacy, classification, how you handle the data backup and storage so that it's available anytime, anywhere in the cloud, right? We are using Office 365. Organizations are using it. Just to share, if I add something, we use it as a collaborative tool as Teams within that, with the tool. While we are transforming, I see less of email communication. What is it giving organizations or us on security and privacy? We have built artificial intelligence inbuilt. Now when I communicate, that is recorded. It is at one place. I can store in that collaboration tool. It's not a chatting tool, right?
Yeah.
And when I put, it is regulated as well.
Yeah. So I'm coming to Jeyandran. So So one is definitely structure for the privacy, but making that one transaction sensitive for the privacy, or that transaction to conform with the privacy requirement and obligation, and making it sure for millions of transactions you are doing it. So do you see a challenge briefly, because we have to also give some time for audience as well.
So in brief, thankfully, I think Flipkart has always been very paranoid about security, and therefore we have a lot of the foundational elements in place so that whenever the personal data protection bill, for example, passes and the particular acts are actually known, we believe we are in a good position to be able to adhere to the norms. But I mean, honestly though, I mean, setting Flipkart aside, I would say that a lot of organizations which may not have had that deep investment or a long history, and I mean, we have like few thousand engineers in our teams, right? Like in terms of how would they be able to adhere to some of these data protection norms, a lot of which have been adopted from GDPR and other regions around the world, while in terms of either talent, availability of, let's say, a copious amount of cloud providers with local presence, or familiarity with tooling and so on, I think it's definitely going to be a challenge. I do hope and wish that the government would actually work closely with the industry ecosystem to do it in a phased manner and do. I mean, clearly it's the right thing for customers. We have always wanted to make sure that customers have ultimate control of the data in our cloud, and therefore we have a lot of the constructs that would actually already be ready to go, right? So, but yeah, I would say that government should be looking at being more consultative and work with us more closely, not just the big companies, but also the smaller ones, and figuring out how to roll it out in the right way.
Yeah. So Tim, briefly.
We feel the same, right? That it's an important requirement. It's the right thing to do for our guests, for our customers. And I would also argue it's the right thing to do within our organizations, right? If we provide mechanisms to support those kinds of rules and regulations, that's really just data cleanup, right? Which we need to do anyway. And so it's better for the business as well as better for our customers.
So we have some time for the questions. If there are any questions on the theme, yeah. Can you get a mic here? Somebody there to pass the mic here? Yeah.
So hi, this is Anshu from DSCI. So my question is along the lines what Jeyandran touched upon. With businesses going on scale and like our transactions as an individual are also scaling up. Like my almost every activity has shifted in a span of 3 to 4 years. If I see, everything is like digitized or digitalized, whatever you may call. So I somehow see a challenge there with the physical security, especially if I add on to the factor of India and being a woman. I mean, like if I order anything online, and two things. Now all my groceries to everything is online, and secondly, for my commutation, I'm increasingly using these aggregators. What I see is that maybe so much patterns about me is being aggregated at these levels that may be taken care of. But my actual concern is my physical security. Random, unknown people know a lot of patterns about me. So what is being done to, like, is it being thought into the product?
So I think we take in a bunch so that we can address 2-3 them together, right? So that we cover at least 3 of them. So can somebody pass the mic there? There. So one is the data and context, and use that data for the physical security, okay?
Good morning, I'm Sai Lakshmi. I head the app security practice out at Entity Data, and it's very good to hear what y'all are doing out at Flipkart and Target and Microsoft, and I'm seeing that. One of the things which we often see is security is a very protectionist measure which you've taken, right? Yeah. And much of it, and it's very much linked to her question, is about user behavior also. So some thoughts around it, because as much you can modify or predict certain user behaviors, how can that impact or progress into the security controls which you bring in? Yeah. That was my question.
So we can get one more question. Is there any? Yeah, done. Passed.
Hi, I'm Vijay Anand from Cognizant. I'm part of data protection and privacy in Cognizant. So I think Jeyandran was talking about the certificate-based authentication and all, right? So when you are identifying a system or a user, whatever, how much of maybe your strategy from a internal threat? So there are external threat and internal threat. So external threat, everyone pretty much gives a lot of priority and importance to fix the external threat. So from an internal threat perspective, again, it is a subjective. So banking is pretty secure, where even internal communication between system to system or access restriction to the data, database, or RDPing a system and so on. So how do you balance between security versus performance versus the usability? It's really a challenge. So what kind of strategy you have in balancing the internal threat?
Yeah, so that's a good question at the end. So we have 6-7 minutes, so we should justice 3 of these questions answering. So you want to start?
So sure, I'll jump in. So I think there's a lot of interconnection between those questions, right? When we're looking at how do we handle this data in a way that we can do analytics so that we can understand our customers in a way that we can continue to better serve them, but do so in a way that we don't identify the customers. Because that way, if we're not identifying individually, right, this is where tokenization and some of these things are really potentially powerful tools, where if we tokenize the data, that abstracts the data from being able to identify the individual, both for internal and for physical security problems, right? But still allows us to do analytics across it potentially so that we can derive insights so that we continue to improve as a business and serve. And that feels like, from our perspective, where the biggest opportunity for us as an industry is, right? What I do love about the privacy becoming more forefront is it's really driving a lot of improvements in security for us to think about the security in context of the data, right? We've thought that's been a concept that we've had for years in security, but we've not made a lot of headway. The privacy regulations and requirements, the needs to protect this data in new ways is really helping us to drive, I think, a lot of innovation towards how do we think about data-centric security, which hopefully will then incorporate a lot of these solutions.
Jeyandran.
So I think you talked about as an individual, since your data is now available with multiple services, their cloud in some either anonymized form or attached to your customer profile and credentials, you feel a bit threatened with respect to how the data will be used and will that be kind of like traced back to me, right? So this is why, for example, personally identifiable information has the highest classification tier, and many of the profiling information that we create, which obviously is helpful for customers, because when you come on our platform, we want to show you things that are relevant, right? So we have a catalog that has millions of items, right? So if I show a storefront to you that just randomly throws an assortment at you, I mean, you will just not really like the experience, right? So many of us take for granted the things that we get by means of our information being with the cloud provider, being used intelligently to serve our needs. But at the same time, as a customer, depending on kind of the how deeply you feel about it, you think about it, there are a lot of controls already companies provide for you to maybe restrict the amount of data that is stored, restrict the amount of profiling information that is captured, or data archiving policies you can control. Google and Facebook have done a lot of efforts now to provide controls to users that you could actually, for example, turn off location tracking, turn off search history by default, for example, and so on, right? So please do look at some of these tools and how it can be used. Also, I was just curious to know, this is a security crowd, right? So I wanted to just do a show of hands just for my curiosity and understanding, right? How many of you, for example, in this crowd actually use, let's say, a hardware security key as one of your two-factor authentication tokens, like a YubiKey or something like that, right? Show of hands.
Show of hands.
Okay. I see like 8 or 10 people, and this is a data security conference, right? So I think in terms of educating users as well, a lot of us as corporations also need to do a lot more work. That is something that I would readily acknowledge in terms of telling people what the right trade-offs are, what they will get and not get, but if they store data with us, not store data with us. And of course, protecting customer data is paramount, and we take all efforts to do that. Even internal threats that the gentleman there was talking about, we have very strict data access policies. It's not that, I mean, even a developer internally can go and access personally identifiable information or transaction information for any of our customers without a need to know. Right, so if there is any access, it is audited, it's logged, audited, and unless there is a need to know, clearly strict actions are taken, right? So a lot of these controls are they are continuously evolving, right? And a lot of these controls we work on, and those are the defenses that we mount to make sure that customer information is very secure with us.
Yeah, Deepak.
I'm excited to answer, actually, and I'll tell you the reason as well. Right now, I'll change, our toes into like a customer, like clients, like a client of Flipkart, right? We all have phones. How many of you only click photos or do facial recognition with that? 90% photos, 10% facial recognition. This is the point which Vinayak brought related to the recognition of the tools and technologies which are in your hand, or a laptop as a physical device when you are accessing. How many times we think about being updated with that system before talking, I have sent some information, it is already gone. And I have transacted, is it safe? Do we really know it got safe or unsafe there or at your place? That's physical, right? Second part, we are not living today with physical identity. You have a virtual identity, right? Anything with the authentication, rightly pointed out on two-factor, rather we should say as a multi-factor authentication. We have more virtual devices at any point of time. How many times we go back at laptop and do Zomato as an order? I don't think so, because you're on transit. You're buying something for your son or a daughter and you're doing it on transaction. By the way, how many times when you transact at the last you see save this card, you tick marked on that, right? So this is more of a cyber from a learning perspective, but I still say, coming now on a corporate seat, there is a platform or aggregators who are doing fairly large jobs, which we may not know. Even banking, when you do a gateway, is a transaction. When you go to a platform, they are doing their part. So there are a lot of automation and integration happening, and in that privacy or security plays a law. So there is a regulation which regulates, you need to bind of it, right? And if I can transfer your question to app security, even in every app security, there is a continuous assessment reviews to happen. Any application security, microservices, millions of it, there is no way you can make it automated and human intrinsic nature can handle it. It can only be when there is a continuous assessment. If at all, there is an instance, while I just want to wrap up this part related to incident management, which is critical piece here, is if something happens, what next? That's also a debate. We are humans, and then we are talking to robots. There is a chance of using artificial intelligence from both sides by us, and equally, there are smart cyber criminals who are also learning AI like us, right? So when they tweak that, then the question comes on the protections or civilians being protection of the processes we are building it up. So virtual identity, we need to take care of it while you are saving best practices as an individual. On a corporate side, there are aggregators, banks, the regulations plays their role. But I sincerely agree that if the education is more in terms of how we have to respond to it, if we are doing every quarter, every month continuous app assessment with the skilled which is missing, right, this will be a gap. If we build on it, then the question which came from corporate cognizant, it's more to do with data and intricity and intuitiveness which you need to build for an automation, which may not be applicable as a consumer, but it definitely makes a lot of sense for cognizant to be intrinsic in that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's also concludes the discussion, but what we try to do with this discussion is to set a context for this particular conference, because many things that we discuss, we have sessions planned in 3 different parallel tracks. So for audience for here, there are 2 tracks which will happen here, and there is 1 track which will happen in Tamarind Hall, which is inside the hotel, and this is a banquet area here. So some of those microservices, container security, all of those elements we will be discussing, and apart from other many areas as well. So so this particular session really comprehends the issue of scale to the security, right, and what kind of scalability challenges security has to really face, and how security has been dealing with those challenges. And thanks team Jeyandran and Deepak for throwing light on the kind of a business that you coming, how exactly these things can be managed. and setting the context for the overall conference as well. So please join me to give a big hand to my co-panelists here. And thank you very much for your questions as well. Thank you.
Insightful discussion. A very special thanks to all the panelists for the wonderful session.